if it isn't. Hi, I'm Matt. So we're coming towards the end of Tech Week now, and I hope you've had a chance to see or hear some of the other sessions that we've had. We've covered lots of some new and exciting and shiny technologies. So I thought I'd show you something that's neither new nor shiny, but it's an established, mature, stable server product. So BizTalk Server 2013 has much of the same sort of functionality at its core as we've had for about 10 years now. Obviously, Microsoft have added loads of new features and upgraded it and improved it and made it cloud ready and all the rest of it. But it's a solid, stable product, and it's not in the slightest bit glamorous, but it does solve a real world problem that virtually every organization has, and it does so in a cost-effective way. So, for example, if you go and look at the Fortune Global 100, 81 of those companies are using BizTalk. So clearly it does something useful, and I hope the next hour and a half will spark your interest a bit and encourage you to come and investigate the product more. This is going to be an introductory session, so my ideal attendee has never really seen BizTalk before at all. I will have some more in-depth materials to suggest to you at the end of the session. And Sam covered most of the housekeeping bits, but we are recording this session, so it will be available to you for later viewing if you have to drop out, take calls, or if you just want to revisit the session later on. And for technical queries, as Sam said, please use the chat tool. She'll jump in every now and then and pass questions on to me. Time permitting at the end, and I hope we will have time, I'll just open the floor and we'll cover off as many of your questions as we can. Failing that, we have an email address, techweek@qa.com, that you can send mail to after the event, and I'll remind you of that when we get to the end of the session. So my goal here is to do about 15 or 20 minutes of PowerPoint, just half a dozen slides just to get us into the swing of this, and then spend most of the session doing a demo, actually going in and building a small sample application from scratch so that you can see what it feels like actually working with BizTalk rather than just looking at endless PowerPoint about it. But we should first, I guess, start by talking about what it is, what the problem is that BizTalk solves. What are those 81 companies doing? And this is what BizTalk is for. It's for integrating your applications. So this is a very old standard problem. Ever since companies have had more than one computer, we've had this problem. Suppose you've got a bunch of different applications and they've all been bought possibly by different departments over a period of many years. They're all running on different platforms, written in different programming languages, communicating using different protocols. And at some point you realize you would like them to talk to each other. So, for example, suppose you've got these three applications here, something that's doing inventory, something that's doing ERP, something that's doing fulfillment. It'd be nice if we could set up some kind of communication between them. So the inventory application tells the ERP application it's running out of stock of something. The ERP application does its thing and passes a message onto the fulfillment application saying, please order more of this. And ideally, the fulfillment application then passes a message back to say, there's more on the way, stop panicking. It's very easy to draw the arrows on a PowerPoint diagram. It's extremely difficult to actually write the code that those arrows represent. Because of these applications potentially all being different platforms, we may well need different development tools, different development skills to write each one of these arrows. Even if we can get it all working, it's very hard to do any kind of integrated monitoring or reporting or tracking. If I want to know how many times this sequence 1, 2, 3 has run, or how often it's failed, it's quite difficult to get that information out of a system that's built like this. It's very hard to upgrade any component or swap it out. I decide I want to go and buy a new ERP application, or even just upgrade the old one from one version to the next. The chances are good that the two arrows going in and out of that application are going to break. They're going to have to be recoded. And all of that, of course, is time and money and effort. And you tend to find yourself locked into old versions of applications purely because all the integration craft around them is too hard to replace. In addition to that, just looking at this, there's no one place where you can even find out what your business process is. somebody looking at your servers wanting to know what communicates with what and when does it do it would have a hard time doing this. You basically have to follow the bouncing ball as messages move from one server to the next and hope that you understand what's going on. So this is where BizTalk comes in. BizTalk is an integration server and business process management server, and the idea is you drop it into the middle like this, and it knows your whole business process, so it's now centralized and in one place. And the applications, rather than talking to each other, don't need to know any of that, they just talk to BizTalk. So in our new version of this business process, the inventory application sends a message to BizTalk, which looks at it, works out what it's asking for, works out what to do next, realizes that what to do next is call the ERP application and wait for a response, and then, based on that response, talk to the fulfillment application. And so all of the integration code can be written the standard way on the BizTalk server. The actual plumbing of this is probably something you get out of the box. So for common applications I might want to talk to, SharePoint, say, or SAP, or JD Edwards, Oracle Business, SQL Server, and common communication protocols like HTTP or FTP or SMTP, or just reading files out of a folder for that matter. BizTalk comes with all the plumbing you need for that. These are things called adapters that we'll mention a bit more as we go along. And these adapters just take care of most of the work. So really the code you have to write is just the bit that's specific to your organization. It's just the business process. The underlying work is being done for you. And because BizTalk Server is such a standard and so widely used, even if your application isn't supported out of the box, there's probably some third party who can sell you the required adapter so you don't have to write all the integration yourself. And you can see, even just by looking at this PowerPoint, that it's now much easier to swap out one of these applications with a new version. If I want to replace my ERP application, I'm probably going to have to rewire arrows 2 and 3, but I don't have to worry about the other applications. They don't need to know anything about this. So this is what it does. It gives us a central place to capture our business process management and to integrate messages flowing between our various applications. There's nothing to say that these applications all have to belong to one company, so you can do B2B in the same way. So if that fulfillment application, for example, belongs to some supplier of yours, that's fine. BizTalk can call out probably over the net, probably over HTTP or a web service call to a remote server, and it supports doing things like signing and encrypting the messages that pass between you and remote organizations. And this starts to look like a service-oriented architecture. So BizTalk can be one component in building your service-oriented architecture and treating these applications as just services. Indeed, one of the features that Microsoft have added over the last few years is a thing called the Enterprise Service Bus, which allows BizTalk to behave as a sort of dynamically configurable central location for service messages. So moving away from the buzzwords of service-oriented architectures and enterprise service buses and all of that, what I want to do on the next slide is just talk us through, step by step, a very, very high-level view of what's actually going on in BizTalk. And then we'll get to a lab where we go and do it. So here we are, the high-level view of how BizTalk works. We'd like to receive messages. It is a messaging system. It's all about receiving messages from one place, sending them to another. So messages will come in, and they will obviously be formatted in whatever way your external system likes. There might be XML, but there might be some flat file thing, or comma-separated variables, or CSV files, or EDI files if you're using Edifact or ANSI X12, something like that. So a message will arrive. It'll be in some format or other, and we want to pass it through our business process, and as a result of doing that, probably emit more messages. So to be a bit more concrete about this, I might want to receive a purchase order, and as a result of that, emit things like invoices or delivery notes, acknowledgements, those kinds of messages. And again, those outgoing messages are probably going to need to be in a variety of formats, If I'm sending a customer an invoice over email, they're probably not going to want an XML file. So I'm probably going to need to support turning it into some kind of flat format, maybe translating it into HTML or something like that. The components in BizTalk that will let us do this, there aren't very many, and the sorts of things we'll have to configure. Let's start on the receiving side. We have a thing called a receive port. So to receive messages in BizTalk, I'm going to go configure one of these receive ports, and the key component there will be a thing called a receive adapter. The adapter is the outer surface of BizTalk, if you like. The first thing a message sees on its way in, and the last thing it sees on the way out, is an adapter. It's the job of these adapters to get the message from wherever it is in the outside world and bring it into BizTalk. And that might be, for example, the file adapter will read a file from a designated place on the disk and bring it into BizTalk. The HTTP adapter will receive an HTTP request, take off the HTTP headers and drop the rest into BizTalk. The SQL adapter will call a stored procedure every now and then, and whichever rows get returned will be dropped into BizTalk. So one way or another, it's the adapter's job to get the message from the outside world and bring it into BizTalk, where of course we have lots of machinery designed to make sure that it's persistent and we don't lose any messages, and we can track them throughout, because that's part of what you're paying for when you buy the product. The adapters are going to drop the message into a pipeline. And the pipeline will do all of the pre-processing. So you can imagine messages arriving from the outside world will be in a variety of formats. We might need to decrypt them, particularly if we're talking to external customers over the internet. We might need to check signatures, again, particularly for external customers. We might need to validate the message. Maybe we're getting some kind of batch message that we need to unpack into all of the smaller messages it contains. One of the things the pipeline might end up doing is translating the message from one format to another. So say from a flat file format into XML. So we're going to configure a receive port to do this, to get the message from the outside world and essentially translate it from whatever weird format it's currently in into a nice standardized XML format. And inside of BizTalk, then we can just assume that everything is in this nice standard XML format, rather than having to deal with 27 different varieties of message. So by the time the message comes out of the receive port, it's in XML, and it gets dropped into a database called MessageBox. Now, MessageBox is really the heart and soul of BizTalk. If this database stops, for example, your whole system grinds to a halt in a second. And as the name suggests, this is where messages go. So while BizTalk is busy processing messages, this is where it stores them to keep them persistent. And at its heart, BizTalk is a publish-subscribe system. So there'll be a list of subscriptions stored in MessageBox that says what to do with each incoming message. So there'll be a subscription that says if you receive a purchase order, you should send it to the following business process. And if you receive an invoice, then it goes to some other process. And if you receive an acknowledgement, it goes somewhere else, and so on. For every type of message you might possibly want to receive, there's a list of subscribers who want to get a copy of that message. And so it's a publish-subscribe system at heart. And in this case, with our purchase order thing, we have some kind of flowchart in mind, some kind of business process in mind that we're going to subject this purchase order to. So the subscription in the message box will say something like, when you receive a purchase order, send it on to our business process, which in BizTalk is called an orchestration. You can think of an orchestration as being a bit like a flowchart. Hopefully we'll have time when we get on to do the demo to write one and have a look at what it looks like. But if you're as old as me and you have a little plastic flowchart stencil tucked in the bottom of a desk drawer somewhere, basically it's one of those. So in this case, we'll receive a purchase order, and probably without making some decisions, we'll go and call some databases and find out, does this customer have credit? Is the thing they want to order in stock? If both of those things are true, then we'll go down one path. If they're not, then we'll go down some other path. So there'll be some flowchart to follow. So MessageBox sends the message on to this subscribed orchestration. And as part of executing that flowchart, we'll probably output more messages. So as part of processing a purchase order, we'll probably send out an invoice and a delivery note and an acknowledgement to the customer. And those messages drop back into the message box database, where they too have subscriptions that specify what happens to them. And it all just sort of rolls on from there. The third and last part of BizTalk we need to talk about is the outbound side. At the minute we can receive messages, but nothing ever gets sent out. And on the outbound side, we have a thing called a send port. That, at least at the level of detail of this slide, is basically a mirror image of the receive side. So on the send side, our outbound messages can get turned maybe back into some flat file format, passed through a send pipeline, which can do things like encrypting them, signing them, or if you want to be more ambitious, turning them into a PDF or whatever modifications we need to make to the message as it leaves BizTalk. And then finally, the last thing it hits on the way out, the send adapter, whose job is to take that message and ship it on to wherever it's going. And that might involve calling a web service, or it might be writing a row into a database, or it might be dropping a file into an FTP server somewhere, whatever's necessary. So this is pretty much it. This is the three things BizTalk does. We can receive messages, we can send messages, and we can run business processes and run orchestrations. And if we can configure those three bits, we're done. And for the most part, we have graphical configuration tools for all of this, as we'll see. So we'll be able to point and click our way through quite a lot of this. One last comment before I move along and go do a demo. You don't have to have any orchestrations. So you can use BizTalk just for pure messaging. I want to pick up a message from point A, transform it a bit, and send it on to point B. And of course, this is publish subscribe, so it doesn't have to be just one recipient. It can be many subscribers. I can say I want to send it onto a whole list of places. And again, if you think about our system that's taking purchase orders and sending out invoices, we probably don't just want to send the invoice to the customer. We'd probably also like to keep a copy of it for ourselves, and maybe we want another copy into the auditing system as well. So there might be a need for having multiple outbound copies of a message. And that's what we're doing here. Multiple copies, possibly in multiple different formats to multiple other systems. So this is a very high-level view of BizTalk then. And what I'd like to do now is switch into my demo environment and go and actually show you it in action. This is going to involve launching Visual Studio. So those of you who are not developers, don't panic. We're not going to write any code at all. It's entirely graphical. It's just that Visual Studio is the design environment for this thing. So here we are, and I've already created a project just to get us off the ground, filled in a few settings and things that I didn't particularly want to do during the presentation. What I'd like to do is I'd like to receive a very sort of simplified order message that I've defined, and it's going to look like this. So here's a sample order. So a really simple looking thing. We've got an order ID of some kind. We've got the customer's ID and a list of items they want to purchase. And just for my toy example, I've decided to have the price and quantity be provided for us already, so we don't have to look those up. And what I'd like to do is take messages like this. I'd like to go and look up this customer in the database. My database for this is the classic ancient Northwind. So here's the Northwind customers table. There's my customer ID right there. And I want to retrieve some information from this database, like the customer's phone number, say, and name, and also what country they're in. And then I'm going to augment this order document with all of that extra information. I'll add in some other things as well. So I'll I'll add in things like a grand total or delivery dates and things like that while we're at it. And then I want to send the message on to another system, possibly distinguishing UK orders from overseas orders, because maybe I have to add shipping to an overseas order that's different to the UK order. So I'd like to send these orders in two different directions depending on whether the customer is in the UK or overseas, which you'll notice isn't in the message they originally sent me. So it's something I'm going to have to work out for myself. So all right, then let's go into Visual Studio and start working on this thing. When you're working with BizTalk, the first thing you have to do really is create a schema, sort of template for every document you might want to deal with. So in my case, I'm going to have a schema for that order document. I'm going to have another schema to represent my extended order once I've added all the other information about the customer and the totals and the due date and all the rest of it. So if I take my project and I'll go and add a new thing to it, and I can just start with an empty schema and type at it, but actually, if I've got an example message, I can try and get BizTalk to do some of the work, so I can get it to generate a schema for me from a message. So let's try that. So buried in here, there's going to be a few things I'll just skim past quickly because otherwise it'll go on for hours and hours. But buried in here are tools for generating schemas, and I'll just go and pick up that file I just showed you in Internet Explorer, which is a well-formed XML file, and make myself a schema from it. So here we go, it's made me some files, and it's generated a schema that says an order has an order ID on the customer block, which contains their ID and a list of items and so on. And it's made some guesses that we will probably have to change. For example, if I go and look more closely at this, it's guessed that quantity is something called an unsigned short. And if I wanted that to be an integer, I can go in using the usual properties window in Visual Studio and just change that. And I can do that to basically tweak anything that it seems to have got wrong about this schema or any more information that I happen to know. For instance, I might want to say, it doesn't make sense to have a purchase order with no items in it. So you can see it's configured this to say I can have an unbounded number of items. I'm also going to put a minimum on that. It says I want a minimum number of items of at least one. I'm not interested in orders that contain no items at all. So I go through and I tweak this thing. XSD, by the way, if you haven't encountered it before, is a completely standard thing. So I imagine that almost everyone on this WebEx will have encountered it before. What I'm going to do now is just bail out of this auto-generated thing and drop in my completed one. There's one or two other changes I'll have to make. Nothing major, but I don't want to have to step through every last button push. So let's have my completed order schema instead. Looks exactly the same. Now I'm going to need to make a new schema that contains all the other information that I wanted to add to this, about customers, country and phone number and things. So let's go and do that. And for that I don't have an example because I'm making this up. So I'll go and add a new thing. BizTalk projects, there's not a wide range of things you can put into a BizTalk project. It really is just the sorts of things we saw on that last slide. There's maps, there's pipelines, there's orchestrations, and there's a variety of schema types. Let's pick a schema and give it a name like extended order. And then this will give me an empty schema where I can start typing things. So I might say I want to have my order ID, as I did on the original order, but I also want to have a new field called order total. And the order total field is going to be probably a decimal, it's the currency amount. And I'd like to have a due date. And my customer is going to contain not just the ID they had before, but also perhaps a name and phone number and country. You can see it's going to be fairly straightforward to build this thing up. I'm just driving all this from the keyboard. Of course, I can right-click on this to add new nodes. So I'm using all these command shortcuts behind the scenes. So let's finish building this one out. There's not much more to it. It's just items. A list of items, each of which is going to contain a stock keeping unit, a price, what else do I have? Quantity, and I wanted to have an item total. So let's have that as well. I need to go and set all the types of these things as before, so I need to go and set price to be a decimal and quantity to be an integer and so on. I'm not going to do that because I have a completed version to drop in a second. So we'll treat that as read. The only other thing I would need to do to be done with this second schema is I need to do a thing called promoting some properties. So when BizTalk reads these messages, it tries as far as it can to leave them in the database. Because typically the messages BizTalk is processing can be huge. We can be dealing with messages that are a megabyte or 10 megabytes even in size. And we don't want to be constantly reading and writing that in and out of the database. As far as possible, we'd like to leave it where it is. And what happens when the adapter reads a message in from the outside world is it attaches to it a bunch of metadata. It attaches to it a little context message that contains all the other things we'd like to know about this, in this case about this purchase order, that aren't part of the body of the message itself. Things like what time we received it, what port we received it on, signatures, things like that, that came in with it. That context message tends to be very, very small, just have a few metadata fields on it. And as far as possible, we want to really only deal with that little tiny context, with the metadata of the message, rather than having to go digging about in the message itself. So in particular, when I want to route this message based on the country that the customer is from, I don't want to have to load the whole message out of the database and inspect it to find that country field, particularly not if this was a much bigger message than this one is. So what I do is I ask BizTalk, while it's making this message, to put that country field into the metadata, so I can read it quickly out of the context message rather than having to go digging about in the main body of the message. And the way you do that is by a thing called promotion. So I'll right-click on this, I will say, please promote this property, please push it out from this message into the metadata, and I'm going to quickly click through this. It creates another schema to hold all these promoted properties, which we needn't detain ourselves with. And back in my original schema, you can tell this property has been promoted because it's been given a mail. So I go through and basically any field in this message that I'm going to actually want to inspect in detail, use to decide where to route the message or anything like that, I need to promote. And I do that just by clicking on it and saying, please promote this field for me. Okay, so that will do with that. We now have a message that's more or less right. Again, I'll replace it with a completed version because that way there's no danger of me forgetting to do some bit. So I'll go and grab my completed version of this, and for that matter, the completed property schema as well, and drop those in. And just to verify, I'm not cheating you. This is basically the same as the one we just saw, only with all the properties set correctly. So quantity is now an integer, price is now a decimal, and so on. Right. Enough with the schemas. For a more big, complex system, I'd have to define possibly many, many schemas, and that would be some considerable amount of work. Next thing I want to do is actually create one of these extended orders. Every time I'm given an order, I want to go and add all that extra data to it. For that, I have the second of our few components, the map. So the idea of a map is we're going to take a message of one type and turn it into a message of another type. So in my case, my map is going to take an order and it's going to extend it with all this other information. For maps too, we have this nice graphical designer. So point and click your way through. My source schema is going to be order. My destination schema is going to be extended order. And then you just drag and drop things from one side to the other. So order comes in with an order ID, and I'd like to just copy that order ID over to the other schema. Customer has a customer ID, and that too gets copied over to the other schema. For the items, SKU, quantity and price, they too can be copied across directly. But what about all the other stuff in my extended order? Well, for that, we have a collection of tools that have been dropped into the Visual Studio toolbox for us called functoids. Basically, Microsoft have just taken a lot of little code snippets and packaged them up into things that we can drop onto this grid. And as long as the data keeps flowing from left to right, everything will be fine. So for instance, item total. The item total is going to be the quantity times the price. Over in my functoids, I have a multiplication functoid that I can drag out onto the design surface and then just wire up. So it takes as input quantity and price and outputs to item total. Similarly for order total. Order total is the sum of all the item totals, and over here I have a cumulative functoid called cumulative sum. So the input to that can be all these item totals, and the output is going to be the order total. So it's all very pointy-clicky. You just wire things up, dragging them in from the toolbox. If the functoid you want doesn't exist, you can write your own under advanced. There's a tool, scripting, that allows you to just drop in whatever script you like. Behind the scenes, for those of you who've come across XSLT, this is just XSLT, so you can add in your own custom XSLT, or you can call C# or VB.NET to work as well. My last bit of my extended order was to go and look up customer details out of the database. And again, we have database functoids, in particular one called database lookup, which can take an ID and effectively does select star from table where ID equals column name. So I can go into my SQL Server database and go look for the row whose ID is, say, that one. This one, as you can imagine, needs some configuration. And this functoid, in fact, all of these functoids have a collection of properties that you can tweak. In this case, it's expecting 4 input parameters exactly. I've given it 1, which is the ID, and it wants 3 others, which are the database connection string, table name, and column name. So, for example, the table name would be customers, and the column name would be customer ID. And again, I'll spare you watching me trying to type in a database connection string. I've got a completed version coming along. Having retrieved a whole row from the database, I then need to pick out particular fields from it. So the value extractor here allows me to take this database lookup, extract a particular field from it, and write it to the name. And again, with the properties of this functoid, I can specify which particular field I want. And in this case, that should probably be the customer name. So I go through with this map, dragging on little snippets of functionality from this toolbox and wiring them all up so the data flows just left to right across and comes out into the extended order. And again, I have a completed one. So let's drag that one in. And in here you can see there's my slightly messy one, this one. There's my 3 fields being looked up and passed across into the extended order. Once I've got this, I can test it out without even leaving Visual Studio. So over here on the map, I can click on this map and pass it, say, an instance of an order document and see what comes out the other side, make sure I've wired it all up correctly. So let's go and specify that I would like to pass in the test map input instance of my sample UK order. And then I'll right click on that and I'll go test the map. And it'll grind away and produce an output document which looks like this. Seems fair enough. It's found the name, phone, and country. It's generated item totals for each item. It's generated an order total. I forgot to show you the due date. There's a functoid that says output today's date, and there's another one that says add a given number of days to it. So that due date is 2 weeks from today. And if we're convinced that all that looks right, then I can go and deploy this thing into BizTalk. So at the minute, I'm just working in my developer environment. But once I've got these schemas and maps ready, I can just, with one click, push them into my BizTalk server. And then once these are deployed, we'll go and have a look at the administrator tools of BizTalk and see what we have to configure to actually read messages from somewhere and write messages out. And you'll see that it's hopefully really quite straightforward. So, seems to have successfully compiled that and pushed it into BizTalk. Let's minimize everything and go have a look at this. This is the BizTalk Server Administration Console. So this is an MMC snap-in. This is the sort of thing you'd be using if you were administering a BizTalk system. And this is where you go to try and work out what's gone wrong as well. So there's a page here called the Group Hub that just shows you at a glance what's currently going on in your BizTalk system. So if I just refresh this page, it'll show me straightforwardly, it's showing me, for example, that not all of my applications are started, which is fine actually. It's showing me that things seem to be all right, we're not currently doing anything, and there's nothing currently suspended, so all these zeros here are just saying I'm not currently working on anything. There are no stuck messages in BizTalk, everything seems to be fine. If I refresh the list of applications, I should see there's my new application that I just deployed. And inside here, my administrator can see all the things that the developer just created for them. So they can see the schemas, with my order and extended order schema. They can see the map. There it is. It's quite a rather complicated name, but buried in there somewhere is the order to extended order. And now let's say I'd like to wire this thing up. So what I'd like to do is receive messages from somewhere in the very basic order format and turn them into the extended format and just for the time being, just sort them into two piles, the UK ones and the overseas ones. Because this is just a demo, we're going to do this with just file drops. So I have an input file drop and two output. One for overseas, one for UK. And obviously I could be outputting and inputting from anywhere, SQL Server, SharePoint, emails, FTP, message queues, whatever I fancy. But for the sake of the demo, let's just use file drops. So in the admin console, you may remember my slide earlier on, I need to create some receive ports and some send ports. Let's do the receive side first then. I'm going to go and create a new one-way receive port. So some receive ports will just read a file in and that'll be it. Some will actually write something back out. So you can imagine, say, an HTTP receive might have a response to send as well. So new one-way receive port, I'll call it order in. And inside of here, I'll go and configure where it's listening to. So it's listening to something I'll call order in file. And this is where I get to pick an adapter and point it at something. So here's the list of all the adapters that I've currently got available. And these are just the out-of-the-box ones in BizTalk, right? These are not, I haven't installed anything special. So you can see a whole range of things for SharePoint, various flavors of WCF, and then pipes, HTTP, and so on. SOAP, SQL, Secure FTP, message queuing, POP, and the one I want is file. And the way I want to configure it is to go look at that input folder that was on my desktop. So that one there. There are many other settings I can configure here. For example, you might be reading a file over the network and so need to retry if the network fails, that kind of thing. But we can skim lightly over all of those. Again, you may remember from the earlier PowerPoint slide that the adapter takes this message and drops it through a pipeline. We haven't written any pipelines, we're not going to. There's a couple that come with it out the box. They're called pass-through receive and XML receive, and you can probably guess just from the names what they do. Pass-through receive does nothing. XML receive reads XML files and promotes those properties. So it goes looking for properties like country and order total that we wanted to put into the context of the message. So I'll okay my way out of there. And we are basically done with the receive side. And that's it. It's now going to listen to that file drop and pick up any files that are in there. Receive locations are dead simple. They're either on or they're off. It starts life off. If I enable it, it'll now just pick up any file that I put into that folder. and route it into that message box database, where it will fail because nobody is interested in orders. There are no subscriptions for orders at the minute, so this is just like some random file that's arrived, and it'll be marked as error. So we need to have some subscriptions, something on the outbound side needs to be listening, so it's going to make some send ports. Again, I want a new, it could be either one-way or two-way. So a new one-way send port, which I'll call UK order, which again, I have a list of adapters, and again, the one I want is file. Just send this message to my out UK folder. There are lots of other properties you can set. So you can configure this sending to only happen during certain hours of the day, for example. Or you can configure a backup if it fails repeatedly. You want it sent by email instead, or whatever. I do need to configure a filter. So the filter is where we make the actual subscription. So at the minute, if I just save this send port and start it up, no message will ever get sent to it because it's not subscribed to anything. So this is where I get to set my subscription, and in particular, I'm interested in all of the ones for which there's my two promoted properties, country and order total. I'm interested in the ones for which country is equal to UK. Okay to that. And one more thing, an overseas port, which is going to be configured almost exactly the same way. It's a file adapter. It's pointing at that output folder there. It needs a subscription, and the subscription it needs is the one that says country is not equal to UK. Send ports are a bit more complicated. You may remember receive locations, which is either on or off. Send ports start life in a state called unenlisted, which means that the configuration database, this one here, knows about them, but we haven't actually told the message box yet. So if I right-click on one of these and say enlist, it'll create the subscription in the message box, and it goes then to a stopped state. So I can have the subscription be in the message box and have messages just queue up, waiting for us to restart the port. And that will allow me to do things like taking the server out of commission without losing any messages. From the stop state, I can then start the port. Just start the other one as well. If you just do a start, it lists it on the way, of course, because otherwise it would make no sense. And now we're almost ready, except that I remember that there was one thing I forgot to do that I intended to do. At the minute, nothing has actually applied my map. On the receive side, I just read in orders and drop them in the message box. And on the send side, I'm looking for that country field, which is never going to be there because I've never actually applied the map. So let me go back to my receive port. And in the properties of this thing, it has a list of inbound maps. And I'll just specify that I actually want to use that map that we created. It turns orders into extended orders. I think we're all done. I think that should work. Let's see what happens. So I'll take my, which are on the desktop here, aren't they? I've got two orders, one from a German company, one from a British company. Drag them into the input folder. Actually, let me show you them being picked up. So let me copy those and actually open the input folder. If I paste them in, you'll see that when the adapter reads them, they disappear. So they've been picked up, they've been brought into BizTalk. And with any luck, unless I've misconfigured something, it should have come out the other side. So in my UK folder, I have a an extended order for the UK. And in my overseas folder, I should have an extended order for overseas. So, okay, so there was a bunch of stuff that we had to do there, but we haven't had to write any code. We haven't had to configure anything particularly complex. It's really all been about defining our own business process rather than boilerplate things. What we're going to get out of BizTalk in the administration console is the ability to work out what's gone wrong if a message doesn't come out, whether it's stuck or whether it's been delivered somewhere we didn't expect it to be able to follow the message throughout. We can configure the precise level of tracking we want. So for each port, I can say, I want you to save the message either before or after you finish processing it. So I can say exactly how much of the data that passes through BizTalk I want to keep. Obviously, while something's being processed, we'll keep everything. But as soon as it's finished processing, we want to trim it down. We don't want to have the database just growing and growing and growing. So let me configure some tracking settings for these things so we'll have some things to see. And then let's break it and see how you would detect that it's been broken. Because obviously that's one of the key things we're getting out of BizTalk that we didn't get out of just pairwise integrating all our applications. So let me go and knock some bits of this on the head. I'll stop that port. I'll unenlist that port and pretend I haven't noticed. Let's just put a couple more messages in and see what happens. I just copy these two files here, drag them to the input folder. They get picked up. Nothing comes out. All we'll see in these folders is the one file that was in there before. And so at some point I realize that nothing has come out and go and look in my admin console. And this is where the group hub comes into its own. So when I go into here, if I refresh it, it should show me that we have some suspended things. There we are. Suspended services. Down here, sliced and diced in various ways, grouped up by their error code or URI that caused the problem or service that caused the problem. Let me just dig down into, say, all of them grouped by application. So all the suspended services belong to this application that we just created. Here they all are. And from here, as an administrator, I can go in and start digging about. I can go in and say, okay, show me this service UK order. That's one of my send ports. It's stopped. Why has it stopped? On the error information, it stopped or suspended because it stopped. So it says this will be resumed after we restart the port. Fair enough. What about the other one? The other one says this was suspended because I couldn't route this message because nobody was interested in it. There are no subscribers for this. This is where I unenlisted one of those ports. So there's now no subscribers listening for overseas messages, so there's just no way to send this. And it makes some suggestions about what I might want to do to fix that. I can go and dig about in the contents of the message. If I'm confused as to why there are no subscribers here, I can go and have a look and see, is the body of the message, is the context of the message. And eventually I work out what it is that's gone wrong and I go and fix it. Like so. And then when I come back into the group hub, I can just resume all these messages and it will carry on processing. So now my group hub should show that everything's okay. And down in the outbound folders, I should have 2 messages. So one from just a moment ago. So the admin console gives us a nice centralized place to go and work out what's gone wrong. You can hook this into something like System Center Operations Manager. So you don't have to be looking at the group hub all the time. You can have it message some centralized operations management tool rather than have separate management for BizTalk and your other servers. If I'm interested later on, I can go back and find out what has happened in the past. So I can go back down here and have a look at tracked services and follow a message through, as much data as I've saved of it anyway, follow a message through from beginning to end. So down in here I can go and have a look and see. So here were some pipeline calls. Here's an XML receive pipeline, so this must be on the inbound side. Let's go and have a look. I'll right click on that, show me what happened here. And I can follow through and see that this is me reading a message off the disk in a particular place via my port order in. This is what came out of that port. It was an extended order. This is where it got sent to. And here is the sending side, sending it out to the out UK folder. So I have integrated tools where I can, from the console, follow a message through from the moment it starts to the moment it ends without having to dig into 27 different systems to work out where the message actually went or why it didn't come out where I was expecting it to come out. I want to do one more little bit by way of a demo because we haven't seen an orchestration yet. So at the minute I have a pure messaging system. A message comes in, I transform it a bit, I send it out again. But I can do orchestrations as well. So let's say I want to add some shipping to overseas orders. So I'll go and find my overseas order port and just unhook it so it's not only subscribed to anything. And then we'll go and do that. Back in Visual Studio, I can go and make a new orchestration. So orchestrations, you remember, are how we model our business processes. So I think it's going to look a lot like a flowchart. And this is going to be my orchestration for handling overseas messages. So inside of here, it gives me a design surface where I can draw out my flowchart using tools that it provides for me in the toolbox. So in this case, for example, the first step in my flowchart is going to be receiving a message, so let's drag one of those on. And then after that, no idea, maybe we've got some complicated decision logic, maybe I have to go and call a web service, or maybe sending messages out to some external service to ask my shipper how much will it cost to ship a package to Germany. And based on the results of that, I'll then do some more work, and I just build up a flowchart in here. For my nice simple demo, I think what I'll do is just add 10% to the cost of overseas orders. So let's go do that. Here in my receive shape, then, you can see it's already complaining at me. It says, I need to know what sort of a message I'm receiving. So I have to tell it this is going to receive an extended order. For this, I have a little bit of a design panel over here where I say, okay, make me a new message. And let's call it incoming order. And the type of message is going to be just this ridiculous drop down here. It's going to be an extended order. And then I can go back to my receive shape and say, okay, the type of message you'll be receiving is incoming order. So it now knows what the type of that message is. And it's now complaining about something else. So it wants to be wired to something in the outside world. Like everything on this white surface in the middle is happening in BizTalk. On the edges here we have port surface where I can define how we communicate with the outside world. So I'm just going to go and quickly configure a port that says I'm going to be receiving order messages from somewhere. And this is one of those things where I'm going to skim through it, and you'll have to take my word for it. So it's a port where I'm going to be receiving messages, and that's all I'm going to have to say here. Really, all I have to say is I'm receiving messages or I'm sending messages. Everything else I can do in the admin console. So I can worry about where I'm receiving them or sending them later on. All I have to say is I want a sort of a generic abstract version of a port that can receive messages for me, and I'm going to wire that into there. Now this receive shape is happy. So I've received my incoming order message. Now I want to add 10% to the total. So let's make another new message and call it what should we call it? Order plus sales. Sales plus shipping. And order plus shipping is also going to be an extended order. And at some point I'm going to have a send shape that sends it out. So here is a send shape, which is going to send out my order plus shipping message to some port that I'll have to configure. Again, I'll just point and click through the wizard to say I want a port where I can send a message, and I'll worry about where I'm sending it later on. And join that up. Okay, so I receive one message and I send a message out. In the middle here, I'm going to have to actually do something. And what I want to do, of course, is to construct this order plus shipping message that I wanted to send out in the first place. So let's do that. Construct a new message, and the new message I'm going to construct is order plus shipping. And you can construct messages by, for example, applying a map, the same way we constructed the extended order message in the first place. You can also construct them by writing some code, and at this point I will have to have a line of code in a message assignment shape that does that work. It's not much code. All I have to say is the order plus shipping message is exactly the same as the incoming order, except for the grand total, where I want the order total to be the same as the incoming order plus 10%. So apologies for the line of code, but to build this whole system, we've only had to write one line of code, so pretty good. We're almost ready to go. There's a couple of small things I would have to configure in here, like I really only want this to pick up overseas orders. I don't want to add 10% to every order. So what I'm going to have to do is define a filter here that says, just like creating a filter on a send port, that says I'm only interested in the orders for which country is not equal to UK. So there is the world's simplest business process, but it does something at least. And again, just as before, I'm going to substitute in my completed one just in case I have accidentally forgotten any small thing. I don't think I have, but just in case. So here's the new one. I guess they have slightly nicer names for ports. That's about it. And now I'll deploy it out again. So push that out into the admin console where I can wire it up. Back into the administration console then for our last little bit. We just refresh that. And it should show me a new orchestration. Hasn't yet been dealt with. And I'll just go wire it up. It's detected down the left-hand side that my orchestration has two ports, one inbound, one outbound, and it wants me to wire them up to actual places in the real world. So I'll have it listen to my order in port, and I'll have it send messages to my overseas order port, just as before. Okay to that. And with any luck, I can now start holding up. So let's have a look. Again, I want to take my two messages and put them in. Let's just have a quick look at the existing overseas ones. So the ones we passed through before, the order total there was 4598. So we're expecting it to be 10% more than that, so it's going to be $5,000. Let me just take my two sample orders, drop them in again. Well, there it is, it just appeared. And if I go and open it up, it is indeed 10% more than it was before. So we've managed to add some sort of business process into this pure messaging scenario. And again, from the point of view of someone actually trying to work with this system rather than doing simple demos on it, it's important that we can actually work out what happened there. And so it's important that I can go back to the group hub and I can find out whether I have any stocked suspended orchestrations, whether it's throwing the exceptions, shouldn't have. And I should be able to go down here and track messages through. So let's go and look at tracked services and see what I've got. There we go, so there's my orchestration. Let's have a look at that. Look at the message flow. So this says, I received an extended order from that input port, and I ended up sending an extended order out to my output port. And most importantly, I can go and look at what happened within the orchestration. So I can click on that and see the sequence of events that happened in my orchestration. Now, this is a very, very linear orchestration. So the sequence that happened is exactly what you expect. We received first, then we constructed the outbound message, and then we sent a response, and then we were done. But you can imagine if this orchestration has lots and lots of branches and we were trying to work out what actually happened, being able to follow through step by step would be really useful. Certainly for developers, the ability to do things like setting a breakpoint on an orchestration so that it stops when it reaches a particular point, and you can go in there and single step through it and work out what it is that isn't working is really important for this sort of business process design. So we've got loads of integrated tools all built into the administration console. I think one more thing I'll show you, and then we'll stop with time for more questions, which is, suppose then that I've gone and I've built this application on my developer machine, as indeed I just have. Now I need to get it to test or to production. I've got a bunch of stuff that I created in Visual Studio. So behind the scenes, Visual Studio has built resources, so I think DLLs. Essentially, these get installed in the global assembly cache in C:\Windows/assembly. But we've also got all the configuration things where I came in here and pointed and clicked my way through creating the C applications and creating send ports. I'd like to capture all of that as well. We don't have to do it again on the production server or again on the test server. if I right-click on here, I can export the whole business as an MSI file, and it really is just a matter of pointing and clicking through a wizard. So it works out which resources it has to export. If I had any IIS virtual directories that were part of this application, I specify them here. If there were any dependencies on other applications, it would say so here. Everything depends on BizTalk system. That's the core of BizTalk. And then it would just build me an MSI file, which I'll put on my desktop so I can find it. And here on my desktop, then I now have an MSI that I can take to another server and install it. And there's everything I need is in there. So if I'm coming to a different server, let's pretend I am coming to a different server, let me go and take this application that's running here and stop it completely, and entirely delete it. To get the application up and running again, all I have to do is import an MSI file, point it at that MSI file, click my way through this wizard, ports are all configured properly, everything's come back just as it was. All I have to do is point at it and say start, and we're up and running again. So it's quite easy to build a system where you can take an application from one platform to another. So I guess that's what I wanted to show you about this so far. Pretty much everything we've seen there is part of the core functionality of BizTalk, which it's had for years and years. I've added many, many other things, such as enterprise service bus support, RFID tag support, slightly changed the way the EDI application works and so on. It has been augmented over the years, but that's the sort of core functionality of BizTalk. And I think if I go off on any other tangents, I'm probably going to overrun my time trying to add them in. So I guess I'm going to stop there. Sam, what do we have? I'm going to finish with this slide, I think, and then if there are any questions, we'll catch up on those. So just remind you, the session has been recorded. It's available for you to view later on. There are courses about BizTalk. There's a 5-day developer course, which goes into obviously much more detail about all the things we just looked at and many more things besides. There's a 2-day admin course for the people who are just going to be using the administration console and don't plan on firing up Visual Studio ever, and a 2-day course just about ESB development. There's also, of course, many, many blogs and books and so on about the BizTalk system. For post-event comments, questions, anything we don't get to over the next few minutes, that's the email address for you to talk to at techweek@qa.com. And obviously that's the same email addresses for all the other Tech Week presentations, so please do put my name or the session name or both into the email, otherwise it's likely to never reach me. Sam.
Hello. I am. Thanks, Matt. So I'm going to stop the recording now then, and just also give my thanks to everyone for joining today. And the last thing you'll hear from me is that when you leave the session this afternoon, our QA evaluation page will launch. So we'd really appreciate a couple of minutes of your time to complete the survey and tell us what we did, hopefully right. And that's it. All done, Matt?
All done. Thank you all for coming.